Hello, New Prospect. Welcome to RTB 2021 for March 10th, 2021. Hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a great day so far. So our texts for today are Luke 24, Second Corinthians 9. We've got Job 39, and then finally we've got Exodus 21, which is a pretty challenging text. So we'll dive right into these. We'll start with Second Corinthians 9. So Paul here is talking about he's urging the Corinthian church, as he has been in chapter 8 as well, to give to the church in Jerusalem in their time of need. And back in chapter 8, he had encouraged them by using the example of the Macedonians who had given generously. And now he's urging them to give generously as well. And in so doing, I think he provides us some an interesting frame of reference for understanding our own giving today. I think he provides some principles for us in our own giving today. Sometimes we tend to take giving in kind of a legalistic way, and Paul says we should never do that. And I don't think it was deemed that way, and even in the Old Testament context. But what he says here is that each one, verse 7, each one must give as he has made up his mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion. And in other words, you're not doing it because you have to do it, but you're doing it because you are a cheerful giver. You're doing it out of joy. You're doing it out of a desire to see God's purposes fulfilled in the world. You're doing it because you see others in need, and you're so keyed in to God's plans and purposes and the way God views the world, that you give the way God would. And of course, God gave out of abundantly to all of us, and so we are modeling the giving and the self-giving of Christ. I think that there's some good principles for thinking through tithing, but also just charitable giving and in general. And frankly, again, this is not just monetary, is it? This is giving in all senses of the word. Let's move on then to we'll go over to Job. So remember, we're continuing our look at Job, and in Job 38 and 39, we've got the speech by God himself. And we talked a little bit about yesterday, the purposes of that speech, of course, is to show God's sovereignty. And he continues to do that here. He's kind of showing God's sovereignty over the animal kingdom. And of course, this is ultimately showing God's sovereignty over everything. If you are sovereign or control, remember we talked about sovereignty, it's the ability to affect your will, even as a king can decree something and it happens. And in creation, we've talked about creation as that kingdom. And part of the kingdom of creation is, of course, the inhabitants of it. And that would include the animals, including people as well, but the animal kingdom. And God shows his supremacy over all of animal life in a way to show his supremacy over everything, whether it's the lion, the mountain goat, the wild donkey, or whatever you find in this particular text. And he's questioning Job's ability to provide for the various aspects of the animal kingdom. In other words, God is once again showing his sovereignty over all things as a way of satisfying Job and comforting ultimately Job, knowing that God is in control. And that's really what the book, again, is all about, that God, Job's faith is going to be placed in a God who is in control over all things. And to me, I think that's a pretty good message for us today, that our faith is based in not a God who is unable to control the things that go on in this world, but is in control of all things. Let's see. Let's move on then we'll do the Exodus passage. So this is the challenging one, right? So Exodus is dealing here with, this is, by the way, the book of the covenant. So Exodus 20 through, really it's 19 through 24, but specifically the covenant codes, it's probably not the best term for it, is found here in chapter 21 going through chapter 23. And then in chapter 24, we actually have the covenant ceremony. But here we have, at the end of the chapter, we've got some what we would call case laws, and case laws are if-then laws, so they're not absolute commands. Technical term for it is a casuistic law or case law, and basically it's if this happens, then this happens. And again, these are governing principles. People really didn't have much access to these laws. In other words, they're there to guide them, generally speaking, and in their lives. And you also have here at the very beginning of the chapter some laws about what the text tells us as slaves and slavery. Now, that's bothersome, and rightly so for us, because we know of the sordid history of slavery in our world, and frankly, that still exists today. There are whether it's the slavery that comes from young girls being sold into slavery, even in our nation, and we have this around the world. In fact, there are some who would say that we have more different types of slavery and slaves in our world than even 200 years ago. So this is obviously a problematic chapter to read through. And yet, one of the things that we have to understand is the world, that the ancient Near Eastern world where the Israelites lived in. The word here, by the way, is ebed, which can be translated slave or servant. And neither of those words really work well, because the slaves back then were not slaves like with the horrible African slavery, or even the Roman slavery of the first century world. So it wasn't like that, nor was it just simply like a servant or a worker. It's kind of in between, maybe kind of an indentured servant type of thing. But what really strikes me about this is, this is not much different from ancient Near Eastern law codes, where they dealt with these kind of things as well. But what strikes me about it is that the Israelite laws concerning servants and slaves was just wholly unique in the ancient world. For instance, the Israelite law would refer to the Eved as a brother who had the right to Sabbath rest, who had the freedom to from labor on other holidays. Hebrew slaves could participate in the Eved, the Avadim could participate in the Passover. They also had the option of being, as we read in this text, ultimately being freed after a certain amount of time. So there's much that we can say here that shows that there's a huge difference between the way this was handled in the covenant than the other ancient Near Eastern world, the ancient Near Eastern world around us. And so I think it's a good way of kind of seeing not just the nature of the covenant relationship, but of God himself. So I hope that helps. And we if you have questions, we can drop those in, and I'll try to answer some of those as well. And that brings us to Luke 24, which of course is the resurrection passage. What a beautiful text to end on today, and to read through that. We also have the really neat story of the two followers of Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus proceeds to appear to them, and of course the resurrected Jesus, and of course they don't recognize him, and he starts teaching them from the law and the prophets, and he reveals himself to him. And then at the end of Luke, that's in an earlier passage, at the end of Luke, Jesus appears to his disciples and does the same thing, and he speaks to them about the law of Moses. This is for verse 44, the prophets and the Psalms, and showing you how all these things are fulfilled in him. And I think what that does ultimately is provide for us a standard, a hermeneutic for understanding the entirety of the Bible, that everything that we find in the Bible from the Old Testament onward is this great wave crescendoing and crashing at the feet of the cross. And everything that we find in the scriptures is fulfilled in Jesus. And so it's not that every single passage is going to you're going to be able to say, okay, I see Jesus in that thee there. No, it's that storyline. It's that great story of salvation history that is crashing at the feet of the cross and the empty tomb. And so when you read the scriptures, We see how God is working everything providentially, sovereignly, to fulfill his purposes through the person of Jesus Christ, and is fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And of course, he ascends at the end of this chapter. And after he ascends, that kind of sets us up for the book of Acts, which is also written by Luke, which begins with the ascension. So it's kind of a crossover there between those two books. But in between, we're going to have the book of Luke, or book of John, and then we'll start that tomorrow. But I hope this has been a good study for you on this day, March 10th, 2021. I hope you have a great rest of the day.